So they're going to provide an overview on a pedagogical framework for teaching for the 21st century in terms of what that looks like from a curricular and instructional perspective. I'm going to pass it over to our workshop leader, so please welcome Roberta Kang, who's the Initiative Director for the Center for the Professional Education of Teachers, and Brian Veprek, a Senior Professional Development Coach at NTN at TC, TC's New Teacher Network. If you're still within your first 3 years of teaching, be sure to ask them about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Roberta and let them take it from here.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Brian and I are not very good at sitting down and talking, so this is going to be an interactive workshop. We're not going to throw anything at anybody in the first few rows, so that's okay. And if anybody comes in late, make sure you give them a little space next to you. Thanks so much for coming this afternoon. It's been a long day, but we're glad that you're with us. As was mentioned, Brian and I are part of the Center for the Professional Education of Teachers, which is a TC-based center that's focused on transformational professional development for schools in New York City and beyond. Well, we primarily are focused right now on 6 initiatives from K-12 professional development to publication projects, performance-based projects with our Literacy Unbound, the New Teacher Network, and our Global Learning Alliance. We focus on on-site coaching, we facilitate team meetings at schools, we do TC-based workshop series, publication projects, conferences, institutes, research and evaluation, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm Roberta, that's Brian. On your chair or close by you is a little note, a little card, a little colorful card. And what we'd like to do is just invite you to think about what are the ideal characteristics of a teacher's college graduate. Just a few of the characteristics or dispositions that you think a TC grad should have. Take a second and write down some thoughts, and we'll hear a few people share out. Yes, right on the card. And if you need one, just raise your hand and I'll give you one. And if you need a pen, just raise your hand and we'll get you one of those too. Oh, okay. You can keep that one on your, and I have 2. A few characteristics of a TC graduate. I see several people have 2 or 3 ideas written down. We'd love to just hear you share out. Just kind of be bold and use that teacher voice. Get that practice or recall it back.
Pedagogy.
Great. Yes.
Empathy.
Yes.
Reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Committed to the whole child.
Committed to the whole child. In the way back.
Change maker. And committed to a global impact.
Yes.
Proactive.
Constant learner.
Yes.
Resourceful.
Yes.
Passionate.
Yes.
Innovative.
Yes.
Problem solve.
Yes.
Culturally sensitive.
Culturally sensitive. Yeah. Okay, great. Yes.
Mover and shaker.
Yes. Determined. Yes.
Social justice.
Yes.
Social justice.
Social justice. Good, good. More. Passionate. Creative.
Be able to do research.
Yes. Yes.
Critical thinking.
Yes.
Evidence-based. Participate and support democracy.
Way back. One more time.
Reflective thinking.
Mm.
Internal motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Ability to smile.
Yes, ma'am. Optimistic. 2 more.
Current on their field.
Okay, 3 more. Yes. Yes. Last one. Yes, sir. Loosey-goosey. If you didn't have a chance to share out yours, you will in a moment. We're going to be working together a lot. Thank you so much for sharing out those wonderful ideas. It occurs to me that no one said, knows the periodic table or has their multiplication tables memorized or can spell correctly. And I think that that's an interesting commentary. One of the things we want to think about today is an education for what purpose and how our education expectations have changed over the last 100 years. This is a picture of school in the early 1900s. We have these very classic looking recitation desks. They had these little tables, but they were all bolted together and they came in one little unit and the kids wrote on slate. And this is a time when education was really focused on recitation. It was focused on remembering because information was hard to come by. And not everybody could have their books, and they couldn't get their information very easily. And so they had to go to the school, and they had to listen and remember. Once they got through school, the workplace looked like this. This is factory working time. This is the Industrial Revolution. And that memorization and that recitation of remembering something exactly as it was told to me and spitting it out and being able to do it again and again and again in the exact same way was a very good preparation for students to go from school to work in the early 1900s. In the early 1900s, this is a picture of what our culture looked like, right? We have these recitation seats, the teacher preaching to the students who are very quietly listening. I'm sure that's an idealized picture. Ragamuffins everywhere. This is the time when we have to go to the wall and stand there in order to talk on the phone. And the classic car. An education for what purpose? In the mid-1900s, sounds old when you say it like that, right? In the 1960s, this is a picture of what our classrooms look like. We now have more individualized desks. We have space to work, and we are working regularly with tools and materials, which means that we're mostly focused on understanding what a wide variety of these materials are and comprehending them. Basic skills, right? Moving from beyond the factory and into the business world. As our culture evolves, our education system works to keep up. But still we see that our school looks pretty similar to work, though there are a few more girls in school than there are in work. This is the picture of our 20th century, our mid-1900s schooling, with the classic chair, the model car, that chalkboard teaching style, chalk and talk, right? And the telephone now, at least now you don't have to stand on the wall, but you can't go more than 6 feet. We're really located here. But today, oftentimes our schools still look like this, desks in rows, kids in uniforms, but our workplace looks like that. And the advancement of technology has changed a lot of the ways in which we're living and working in the world. So school still looks like this, but our workplaces have evolved. Today we're working out of our coffee shops, we're working out of our houses. I know a lot of educators working out of their cars because they're going from site to site to site to site to site, meeting with their different schools or meeting with their different principals, or even working as a teacher on multiple sites throughout the week. This is causing a challenge for us. It's causing a real dilemma. I want to take a minute to listen to just a very, very short portion of a TED Talk given by Sir Ken Robinson. And this is about the concept of divergent thinking.
Great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, I mean, there are tests for this. I mean, one kind of common example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? You know, like, does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? You know. Now, they tested this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up, a lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. You know, they've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. I mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration. You know, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way, it's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. We have to think differently about human capacity. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. If we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy.
So here's some of those stats that are mentioned in the video, and how the scores, people who are scoring at the genius level for divergent thinking, the numbers are just dropping as they get older and proceed through, well, they proceed through schools. So it brings us back to this question of education for what purpose. And in Roberta's comments, she made comparisons between the world of the school and the world of work. But we don't want to give just the notion that schooling is instrumental toward getting the right job, right? There perhaps can be work that we do in the schools that speaks to a greater purpose or a wider purpose, or a purpose that isn't one that is situated in the world of work. And I'd like to put forward that a purpose for schooling would be to cultivate agency in our students. Now, in order to try to make some sense of that notion of agency, or try to tease it out a little bit, I'd like to offer a tripartite notion of what agency might look like. The first portion I like to call intellectual agency. This is helping students arrive at determinations of true and false, fact and fiction. This is essentially intellectual judgment. In our current media environment, obviously this is a very important skill for students to have. But then also, to think about it, what are the educational implications of the fact that students have this in their pocket? They have access to the entirety of the world's information and misinformation literally in the palm of their hand. So how do they weigh those bits of information and misinformation in order to evaluate the veracity, plausibility, credibility of that info? That's where intellectual agency comes into play. Now, that intellectual agency informs what I like to call moral agency. This is about questions of right and wrong. Again, there are many belief systems, there are many moral systems, legal systems that would tell students what is right and what is wrong. But ultimately, if they're following those things blindly, again, we do not have divergent thinkers. Right? We do not have people who are stretching out and reaching with their minds to determine perhaps better ways forward. But, as the arrow is meant to indicate, having this rational faculty of intellectual agency is required before we can get to this notion of moral agency, this idea that we can be able to puzzle through these questions of right and wrong. Now here's where we get into the bit that Roberta was presenting for us. This third layer of agency, I kind of struggle with the wording for. At first I was calling it vocational agency, but I didn't want to confuse number one with this notion that a vocation is truly a calling, as we heard, those of us who were at the luncheon. And then also there's this notion that vocational is this kind of word that's been co-opted in schooling and it causes problems. My problem with it is that I don't think we do enough of it. But I like to call this third notion of agency occupational agency. That is to say, the things with which we occupy ourselves. And that can be both professional, the world of work, but then also personal occupations. If we want to use the language of vocation, we would say vocational and avocational here. But as you can see from the arrows, intellectual agency and moral agency come together to inform the action that we take. This is a little bit of a cycle here, and some language that we like to use at the center to help teachers and school leaders and other stakeholders think through big questions about schooling is one question we like to ask, and this ties into my intellectual agency, is what? What happened? What is? What is correct? What is true? What is false? These are questions of fact more than anything. They're, I wouldn't say objective, but they're low inference, right? Let us determine the facts. Then when we get to the moral question, it would be more of a so what? What does it mean? What does it matter? What is its significance? So what what happened? So what in the moral realm? What does it mean to us? But then that gets us to the idea of the occupational agency, and the occupational agency is what the question we like to ask is, now what? What action are you going to take? How has your intellectual agency and your moral agency informed your ability to do things in the world? Otherwise, we're just navel-gazing, which is a thing I know a bit about thanks to the fact that I'm in the philosophy program here. Now, I do want to point out one thing. I like to throw a little iterative arrow into here as well. That is to say, we have our question of our what with the moral. The what informs the, with the intellectual. The what informs the so what of the moral. The so what and the what inform the now what of the occupational. But then we get results after we do things. We collect data. We gather information. And that turns right back around and becomes the what of a new cycle of inquiry as we continue to take action on and on and on. So this isn't some sort of hermetically sealed process. The different notions or the different facets of agency as I've outlined them are continually informing each other, but this continuous iterative process of re-examining the work that we do. You, as TC folk, you can smell Dewey all over this, obviously. So that brings us to sort of our question, and there it is. So given the facts of technological innovations that are shrinking the world through telecommunications and travel, what does an education for 21st century world look like for us? And we're going to get into a little bit of that right now. Well, we're going to ask you to get into a little bit of that right now.
A few years ago, some doctoral students in our program conducted an international research study that ultimately developed what we like to call the Global Capacities Framework. And it was through collaboration across 7 nations that we were able to do high-level research in classrooms, doing classroom observations, teacher observations, and interviews at high-achieving schools all around the world, asking the question, what are you doing for your students? What innovations are you taking in light of these 21st century changes? And the result of that became the Global Learning Alliance. And we have members across actually it's about 8 countries now, and we meet every 2 years to consider what's happening in your country and what can we learn from one another. Quite different than a lot of conversations. This is a collaborative conversation about how can we be collaborating with our colleagues from around the world, not how can we be competing with them. In these conversations, what has resulted is the Global Capacities Framework, which acknowledges 4 domains for important areas of learning as we go into the 21st century. We're all very, very familiar with the first domain, the critical capacities, which are the bedrock of our current educational system: interpreting, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating. But it's these other capacities that we're really drawn to, and we're really trying to consider how can we be incorporating these into our education moving forward. So our critical capacity, as I've described, is this capacity to develop full critical cognitive thinking in interpreting. You'll have it, yes. Yes, we have folders for everybody, don't worry. So the critical capacity includes interpreting, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating. When we look at the creative capacity, we want to be paying attention to the importance of imagining, the importance of questioning and being curious about the world, the importance of simulating, going through simulations or walkthroughs, and appreciating ambiguity, knowing that we are not living in an either-or world right now. We're not living in something that has clear demarcations. Everything's blurry. And so we need to be able to appreciate that sometimes things aren't going to line up exactly right. The third domain is a communicative domain. Now more than ever, it's important to understand our skills of communication. We need to be observing, we need to be reflecting, we need to be communicating in multiple modalities, speaking and over email and PowerPoints and Skype calls, and all of those things have different rules, ways of communicating. And we need to be collaborating strategically, not doing anything by ourselves anymore. We're always working with other people. The final domain is the global capacity. Global capacities really challenge us to think about how are we going to solve real-world problems? How are we going to demonstrate a global consciousness? Intertextual thinking, thinking between multiple texts and multiple areas, multiple types of texts and media, and then engaging in multiple perspectives. These are the domains of the framework, and we think that this is where education is moving. As we think about preparing our students for the next generation, preparing our students for the next 20 years, where will technology be? Where will we be? 20 years ago, we were just getting the internet. I remember sending a letter, a handwritten letter to my friends, explaining that to them what email was for the first time. No, it sends instantly. It's amazing, right? And now we get it in our pockets. Just a quick story. My son is 10 years old. And a year or so ago, he had some vocabulary homework to do. So he lays down on the floor of our 2-bedroom apartment, and he opens up his classic green composition notebook, where he is writing in his number 2 pencil all of his vocabulary words. And I'm like, wow, vocabulary. Okay, no, it's good, vocabulary's good. And he lays down next to me, and I says, what are you doing? He says, I'm doing my vocabulary assignment. I said, great. He takes his phone, and he presses the button. He says, hey, Siri, how do you spell whatever the word was? And Siri tells him how to spell it and what the definition is, and he writes it down in his book. Right? That's a 20th century pedagogy in a 21st century world. We have to think beyond how do we get information, right? We've been learning, and we have had to, because information has been hard to get. We've been learning, we've been teaching kids how to get information, not what to do once they have it. And now they have all the information that they could ever want literally at the press of a button. We have to teach them what to do with it and how to make sense of it. That's where our education, we hope, is going. And that's what we want you to help us with. I'm going to give it to Brian, and he's going to pass out. I'm going to talk about it, and Brian's going to pass out some of our materials for the day. In the folder that you're getting, you're going to be assigned a group. And the groups are labeled right around the room, and you can just, all these chairs have rollers on it, so you can just roll them all over. And we are going to enact a little bit of simulating ourselves, in that every group here is going to be assigned one of these capacities and to be given a 20th century task, a 20th century assessment. And we're going to invite you to pick one of the capacities from one of the domains and re-envision that assessment for a 21st century world. The instructions will all be given to you once you get into your groups. And we're going to have about 20, 30 minutes kind of figuring this out, working with it. You'll have a little bit more time figuring out the domains and talking with your other colleagues around the room. And then we'll come back together at the end to hear all the great and creative ideas that you come up with. So as I mentioned, Brian's passing out folders. And in every folder, when you open it up, there's a color and a number assignment. Look around the room, and you'll see all of those colors and number assignments around. Just going to gather up the chairs. Yes.
We'll get one task folder, and in the task folder are all the instructions you'll need. You'll notice right away a memorandum from the Department of Education and Dr. Roberta Kang, the director of the Office of 21st Century Skills. Your task as a group is to look at the citywide standardized assessment task, which is in your folder, and you will be asked to redesign that assessment task in order to measure students' progress toward mastery of one of these global capacities that is outlined in the framework. Now, you'll also notice in your task folder, one of the domains has been assigned to your group. So either the communicative, the creative, or the global domains. As a group, you will pick one of the capacities listed in those domains and then redesign that standardized assessment task so that it measures students' progress toward mastery of it. All of these instructions are outlaid for you in the memo from the Office of 21st Century Skills. If you have any questions about the instructions that are outlined in that memo, you can ask me, you can ask Roberta, you can ask Faith. Otherwise, everything is there for you. If you need any materials to complete your task, just ask and we'll be happy to provide them for you. Any general questions before you and your group get to work? Then go to it. Thank you. Okay, I'll put it together. I'll put it together right now here.
task is, your group is focusing on the creative domain. So you're going to choose one of the categories in the creative domain to highlight or amplify in the test, and come up with a new test that focuses on that area. I think you guys got it. Help each other out as a group. So choose one of those. Yeah. And I'll be back to hold it. Yes. And we have poster papers and markers and everything. Okay, so your task is to take a look at your communication as your domain. So as a group, you're going to choose which one of those 4 areas you think is most important, and then you're going to take, there's a test in that folder, a little English language arts test. So if you were to choose observing, then how would you make this test better at assessing the language? Okay, markers down. Markers down. I just would invite everybody to return to a seat. Invite everyone to return to a seat. Just have a seat. I'd like to invite everyone to return to your seat. And let us know when you're ready to hear from your colleagues. We have just about 5 minutes left in our session tonight. So if I can have everyone's attention, please. If we can get everyone's attention, please. Okay, I've got blue 3 with us. We've got green 2. We've got red 2s with us. Blue 2s with us. Red 1 is with us. Good. Blue 1 is with us. Great. Green 3, not yet. Blue 4, not yet. So close. Okay, we've got, blue 3 is with us. Just waiting now on red 3. Okay. Did you feel, you don't have to answer this, but if you felt stretched, if you felt a little stretched today, yes. We have to stand in the stretch of learning, right? We have to stand in the stretch of learning. We cannot just, we don't want to accept when things are just too easy. It's too easy, it's too easy. We want to stretch. We don't want to feel angst or to feel anxious, but a little challenge is okay. About 7 minutes ago, I was very concerned that we wouldn't have anything up around the room, to be honest. But oh my gosh, everybody has something and it's really great. Well, we don't have time for a full gallery walk, but what we would like to do is just to invite each color to represent a little bit of their work. And I'm going to reveal the curtain, kind of open up the curtain for you to let you know that everybody in the room has the same task. So everybody looked at the 8th grade ELA GPS thingamabobber, okay? Everyone looked at the same one. And each color had the same domain. So all the greens had global, all the reds had creative, and all the blues had communicative. We'd like to invite one color, one representative group from each color to share with us how you reinvented this task to highlight these new skills. And then we just have a few closing thoughts before we end the day. So can I get a volunteer from green? A green volunteer. Green in the back, green. Okay, so you're going to represent. I'm going to give you the mic. You got to use your teacher voice, okay? Okay, good.
Hi, so we were green 1. And we had global capacities, we chose engaging in multiple perspectives. And so what we said is that we wouldn't have the students take a traditional written assignment, that we would have students discuss their perspectives on the 3 articles, read the articles, discuss them in a group, so they will be observed discussing, and have that being videotape, having those discussions, and then somehow have that uploaded so that the teachers could assess them having those discussions. And the rubric would include how many times they spoke within that group and other things related to how many times did they cite textual evidence from the articles, and that's how they would be assessed. Oh, right, and they said that they would actually do a real-world application also of using the GPS to go around and locate themselves throughout the building and then respond and upload that information.
Okay, I would reject that as the state, because the union would never allow that to happen, because you would have one teacher doing all those assessments, and if this is an independent rating system, it has to be actually assessed by somebody other than the teacher.
Well, we're getting everybody to buy into
Yeah.
the whole 21st century perspective, so there will change.
It's the proposal. It's the proposal.
I'll tell you, as I mentioned to most groups, these are not finished ideas. These are the roughest of rough drafts. These are prototypes. And yes, we could go into a long troubleshooting phase and we can get into all the real consequences of these choices. But right now we're asking you to imagine, we're asking you to dream big about some of the possibilities, not the least of which is to get rid of the written test. Is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? Meh. I can't wait to talk to you about this after the session. Look, can we get a representative from the red group? Any red group in the back? Woo! Here's your mic.
All right. So, okay, so we had creative capacity, and we selected appreciating ambiguity, and that was because we felt that the task, the prompt, really asked students to just stop at demonstrating their proficiency at the mid-level block in the appreciating ambiguity rubric section. So we were like, okay, how do we design this question to be one that pulls them to demonstrate that end of that competency section? So we designed a question that said, create a strategy that allows the user to share their location while also being in control of their privacy. And if we had an opportunity to take it a little further, we would have asked the students to then identify flaws or issues that could arise from their strategy. So that was our...
Thank you. Thank you so much. And finally, a strategy from the blue group. A blue group, representative from the blue group. All right.
So we talked about a lot of things, but sorry. We talked about a lot of things, but my favorite parts, sorry, you guys can add in, were that traditionally writing assessments are individual, because how do you know if a kid can write unless they're doing it themselves? But we discussed how in the 21st century, other than writing emails, how often are you writing big things on your own? It's pretty rare. So we talked about how like scripts are written, or research proposals, or when you're writing the news, or when we're writing policy that's not done by one person and judged by one person. Therefore, we were talking about how new writing tasks can include group writing, and it said in the rubric that we're creating original ideas using multiple intelligences of each member to create one product, and that does have implications for what is the assessment for? Is the assessment for individuals, or is it for the group? And the implications of the use of a group grade as opposed to an individual grade for something that involves writing.
Thank you so much. Our final thoughts. We are not at the end of the 21st century yet. We are at the very, very beginning. We are 17 years into 100 years, okay? So are we there yet? No, we are not. Is this happening yet? A little bit, yes, in some places. But it can't happen more unless our educators, our community at TC, starts to really understand what are the demands for our students intellectually, morally, and occupationally for the next 100 minus 17, because I'm an English ed teacher. Okay. Thank you. For the next 83 years. Our closing thoughts on that is that a little change can make a big difference. In your small groups, each of you considered what's one change we could make to this assessment. And as I walked around the room, I didn't see any task or idea that was not completely reformed, that was not completely revised. These ended very, very differently than they began. And you looked at changing one aspect, one quality of that assessment. A little change can make a big difference. The second thing that we wanted to share with you is that as we transition into this new century, we need a new pedagogy. We cannot rely on desks in rows and hands raised. We will lose our generation. We will lose them. So we have to be innovating. That's what CPET is trying to do here at TC and in our schools in New York City and around the world. And we do that in two ways. One, on a micro level, with a new teacher network, provides professional development and network support for all TC graduates in their first 3 years in the classroom. And then on the opposite end, on the macro level, with our Global Learning Alliance, engaging in international research studies and collaboration with colleagues from other universities and school systems around the world. It's been like such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for stretching with us and for growing with us. Your colleagues and peers have done really, really thoughtful and intellectual work all around the room. So please take a moment before you leave to visit some of the other posters and see how this task was redesigned with your creativity, communication, and global perspective. Have a great night, everyone.